Afternoon. So, recapping a little bit. Yesterday, I tried to introduce the idea that Nalanda, in addition to being a place where the truth was being searched for, ideas were being debated, but it was also, and particularly, a place where that truth was being applied with the aim of becoming a better person, with the aim of being able to more effectively benefit others. And though this was this sort of crucible of intellectual pursuit, debate, purification of knowledge, it was being done within the context of not just finding out what was what, but transforming the individuals, working on transforming oneself into a better person, more able to serve not just humanity, but all of creation. This pursuit of a state where one can really be of benefit to all others is the Mahayana aspiration, and the aspiration to attain a state where you can benefit others is called bodhicitta, and the person who possesses this is the bodhisattva. And so all practices ought to actually be of benefit to others. So the initial stage is the cultivation of bodhicitta, the cultivation of this mind of enlightenment, the cultivation particularly, initially, of the compassion that is the main cause that brings about this bodhicitta. And as we began to discuss yesterday, compassion, in order to have compassion for others, one has to have an understanding of the situation that they're in, the suffering that they're experiencing. And in order to have an understanding of the suffering of others, one has to recognize the suffering that we are experiencing. And so at the very beginning of the spiritual path is a recognition of the suffering that we are experiencing, the situation of dissatisfaction that we are experiencing, as that is that recognition of our own dissatisfaction, that recognition of our own suffering becomes the seed of recognizing it in others and determining to do something about it. So the quality of compassion that we have to work towards, or to go a little further into the suffering that we are experiencing, as I said yesterday, and this is really to recap, there are these three levels of suffering. There is what we call the grosser level of suffering, the suffering of suffering, which is that suffering that we experience. And it's that suffering that we as a society are aimed at dealing with, coping with, addressing. I mean, whether it's the medical profession or whether it's the most a large part of the running of a society is devoted to addressing this suffering of suffering. The more subtle form of suffering, the suffering of change, is a form of suffering that most of us would not see as suffering. We would see someone doing well in life and we would hardly say, oh, that person is suffering. But it is important Yes, better. You were suffering the suffering of suffering, not being able to hear me. So, this suffering of change is really our viewing those people who are experiencing pleasures in life and viewing ourselves experiencing pleasure and seeing that underlying that pleasure is suffering, that when the causes for that pleasure are exhausted, we are going to be left suffering. They say that within cyclic existence, the most terrifying thing is when someone within the sort of godly realms of existence, who has been leading a life of simply experiencing great bliss and able to, one of the qualities or attributes of someone within this realm is a certain amount of clairvoyance. And so these beings in this realm who experience this great bliss can actually see when their time as gods is coming to an end. And as they suddenly realize that they have exhausted the extraordinary merit that enabled them to live there, when they see that this is exhausting and that they are going to suffer at the end of this, the fear that they experience recognizing the end of the blissful time is considered one of the most terrifying moments within cyclic existence. And I say that laughing because I think we've all seen, I think that our President Trump must have experienced that when he realized that his tenure as president was coming to an end, and all the perks, Air Force One, etc., were coming to an end. I somehow felt that would have been akin to one of these beings in the godly realm realizing that the merit that he had for being there was running out. So I think that that's actually a very good illustration of this suffering of change, how a good time comes to an end, and the suffering that we experience at that point is far greater than it's. I was on my way to the airport in Bombay once, and I found myself, I don't know how or why, it was an odd situation, on the side of the highway or road in front of one of those very fancy hotels. It was the Four Seasons. It was a brand new hotel in Bombay, and there I was on the side of the road. Someone had dropped me there, and I was meant to be picked up, and there was a terrible traffic jam, and the car that was trying to pick me up was simply not able to get to me. And as I stood there next to my suitcases, this European man in a suit and tie came up to me and said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm waiting for a car to get to the airport." And since I was simply waiting for my car, we chatted a bit. And he asked me how I had come to be a monk and how I had... and he had told me that he was Belgian. And so when I answered his question of how I had come to know the Tibetans and become a Tibetan Buddhist monk, I said it was actually due to a Belgian that I had come to be interested in Tibet and Tibetan Buddhism. And he said, "Oh, who might that have been?" And I said, "You know the Tintin books? You know the Tintin books? The author of the Tintin books, Hergé, was Belgian." And he laughed. And he said, "You know, I am the general manager of the Four Seasons Hotel. And I move from hotel to hotel as general manager. And I have my full collection of Tintin books from when I was a little boy. And I have it here in my room." And because of this sort of camaraderie that had developed as I stood by the road, he summoned the hotel fancy car and had it take me to the airport. And I got in this fancy, long BMW and was whisked out on this new bridge that sort of avoids the traffic of Bombay. And I thought, this is really the godly realm that I'm experiencing. And then we arrived at the airport, and of course I had the cheapest kind of ticket to go on. And I went from this fancy comfort to standing in the long line to check in. And I thought, this is it. This is the same thing. And it's very, if we can view it this way and laugh, but most people who experience the fancy then really have a hard time when they have to sort of change gears. And so that's the suffering of change. And of course, underlying all forms of suffering is the all-pervasive suffering of samsara, or of conditioned existence, which is that as long as we cling to a sense of self, we are the victims of a process of wishing to please ourselves, wishing to protect ourselves, engaging in actions that will cause us to suffer, will cause us afflictive emotions such as jealousy, such as envy, such as anger, such as attachment, etc. And so that is the suffering that we have to really pay attention to. That is the suffering that we have to work at removing if we are going to actually change our state of being in any kind of solid, permanent way. And as we are talking about compassion, it is that form of suffering that we recognize ourselves to be experiencing, that we recognize others to be experiencing in the same way. It is that form of suffering for which we have to develop compassion. And in order for us to have true compassion, the wish to remove others of their suffering, we have to really identify with what suffering is, feel it, know it ourselves. So the development of compassion is not something that we do by reading about it and saying, okay, well, that's compassion, I have to have compassion. No, it's something that we really have to work on. The steps of recognizing suffering that I just went through is something that in our meditation we have to sit and think about. Thinking about the grosser levels of suffering, thinking about the more subtle level and the deepest, all-pervasive suffering, and really identify the way in which we experience that. And then think about the fact that each and every other person whom we come in contact with, each and every other being we know of or we do not know of, is experiencing that same grosser suffering and all-pervasive suffering. And it is out of that recognition that we begin to feel the wish to, as in the same way we want to remove our suffering, want to remove their suffering. Now, in order for our meditation to have a little more power, we have to also recognize, as I said yesterday, the degree to which we are dependent on others for everything we have. Every single element in our lives is due to the kindness of others. We take most of this for granted as we drive on roads, but if you look out and you watch people making the roads, you can see the hard work that goes into making roads. You can see those poor people pouring the tar and the heat that they put up with in order for us to have a smooth ride on the road. And then think of the amount of work that goes into creating the vehicle that we ride around in, and etc. Every bit of food that we eat. We may grow food, but there is still a great deal of work that goes into providing us with the nourishment that we have, the infrastructure that enables us to survive. And the more we recognize our dependence on others, the more our hearts will open, recognizing the suffering that they are experiencing in the same way that we are. So these are, let's say, mental exercises or analytical meditations that are meant to conjure up in us a feeling of wishing to remove the suffering of others, this feeling of compassion. Now, compassion is not the actual removal of other people's sufferings. And I say this because, of course, we would like to be able to remove, and in any situation where we can, we do remove the suffering of others. But compassion, this is a quality that we have or within ourselves. It's an inner quality. It's a wish. Compassion, as I strictly defined, as I've said it a few times, is the wish that others be free of suffering. With that compassion, we can get involved in, let's say, medicine and develop the ability to actually remove some of that suffering that others are experiencing. But compassion is the motivation that would accompany that. Compassion, as I say, is a wish. It's something within us. It's our attitude towards others. And compassion is not something that we simply work on at the very beginning of our spiritual journey. It's not that we can say, okay, I've done compassion, all right? I have compassion. I have the wish to remove the suffering of others. Okay, now let's get into whatever. No, compassion has to accompany us all the way along. It is compassion that motivates us to assume responsibility for others. It's compassion that motivates us to continue along the path of mastering the ability to be of benefit to others. And then once we attain the full enlightenment by which we can ably help others, it is compassion that motivates us to implement that which we have mastered as fully enlightened beings. So compassion is a quality that accompanies us, or must accompany us, through our spiritual journey. I think that for a journey to be a true spiritual journey, it must be imbued with this wish to remove the suffering of others. And compassion, I was telling you last time about this division between those who aspire to attain freedom from their own suffering and those who aspire to attain the full enlightenment of omniscience to be able to help all sentient beings. They both have compassion. They both necessitate compassion to accomplish. However, the attainment of the full enlightenment of the compassion is acted upon, the compassion is really implemented to the fullest. One is assuming that responsibility towards others to the greatest degree, let's say. So that's the sort of bedrock. And I permitted myself to repeat the stages that I presented yesterday. Really, some of you were saying we would like to meditate. Well, what I just led everyone through is meditation. And we shouldn't think of meditation as something where we have to be quiet with our backs up and looking down the slant of our noses or with our eyes closed or whatever, and our hands in a particular position and our legs crossed. No. Meditation is, the Tibetan word for meditation, which is gom, is to familiarize yourself. And the process of developing familiarity is not one that necessitates any kind of physical posture. Yes, physical posture can help us. We know that if we're trying to think clearly, if we sit up straight, we're better able to do so. So, sitting up straight is good. But don't consider that in order to engage in this type of analytical meditation, we have to assume any kind of special posture. What's important is the mental exercise that we engage in. What's important is that we go through steps, developing familiarity, developing an acceptance of of the result of a line of reasoning that leads us to a conclusion. Meditation should, if we are, for example, developing we're trying to develop compassion, through a series of thoughts, we should arrive at this feeling of wishing to remove the suffering of others. And once we get that, to that point, we then experience it. We sit there and we feel it. We feel the result of the reasons and the thoughts that we've gone through that make us wish to remove the suffering of others. And that's something that we hold on to for as long as we can. The mind will waver, and then once it's wavered, once we've recognized that it has wavered, we can then go through these reasons again and bring about the feeling of compassion again. So the whole line of reasoning that I led us all through just now is meditation, is the meditation that you, if you wish to cultivate compassion within yourselves, would go through to do so. So I mentioned yesterday the two forms of meditation, the calm, abiding meditation where you have the mind sit in one place, and the analytical meditation where you are actually using or thinking through a process. And the particularly important and effective form of meditation is the analytical meditation. Analytical meditation, if you have to buy a car, if you research and you very carefully establish what your needs are, and you research what cars provide for those needs within the budget that you are allotting. That whole process of figuring out what the right vehicle would be for you would be a process of meditation. It will lead you, if you do it properly and logically and clearly, to a correct result. And you can then hold on to that conclusion with a certain confidence. And that's what we do in meditation when we're trying to cultivate compassion, or the next thing that we work at cultivating after we've developed compassion, which is this quality of bodhicitta. So once we have the compassion, which is the basis of the Mahayana path, the greater path, we then have to work on the techniques for bringing about bodhicitta. Bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment. So once we have developed compassion, the wish to remove the suffering of others, we then have to use that compassion in order to cultivate the determination to attain a state where we can remove the suffering of others. And so, traditionally they talk about two ways of cultivating bodhicitta. We will concentrate on one, which is the method called exchanging self for others. In order to develop this, now I'm going to just step aside for a moment and remind everyone why I'm sitting here telling you how to cultivate bodhicitta. Here we are at Goa University, and I'm giving you the techniques for becoming a Mahayana Buddhist. These are the fundamental practices of a member of Nalanda monastic university in Bihar 1,500 years ago. Nalanda was a Buddhist monastery very much in the Mahayana tradition. When we read the treatises by the great masters of Nalanda, each of their tomes begins with a statement about the importance of bodhicitta, the importance of seeking full enlightenment in order to help others. And then their philosophical work becomes a part of the method by which we can attain that. So the philosophical texts written by Nagarjuna, Buddhapalita, Bhavaviveka, Chandrakirti, etc., all of those, let's say, refinements on their predecessors' philosophical views were all to contribute to a practitioner's practice towards the goal of attaining full enlightenment for the sake of others. That's what it was all about. And in order to attain that goal that they are all aspiring to, you have to have the single-pointed determination to attain that goal. And in order to have that determination, you have to have an understanding of why you wish to attain that goal. And in order to have that understanding of why you wish to attain that goal, you have to really acknowledge the suffering that others are experiencing and that you are experiencing and that you wish to help others out of, and that you are not qualified to do as an unenlightened being. So all of those elements form the basis, form the sort of bedrock of the practices that we're discussing here. And I say all these things because I think it's really important to have these meditations to understand the context in which they're practiced. So, and as I mentioned to you, before he died, he said to the king of Tibet, there may be a time when the form of Buddhism that I have introduced will be challenged, and at that time you call my student, Kamalashila from Nalanda, and he will help defend this form of practice. And Kamalashila went to Tibet, and there was a great debate before the king, and his form of Buddhism was seen to be superior, and he remained in Tibet, and he wrote certain books. And in one of them, he was he followed the philosophical view of his teacher, which was a Madhyamika view, but not the Prasangika view. It was a Svatantrika Yogacara view. It was a particular view, but nonetheless, it was a view which at the time was considered to be the most refined and sophisticated, and therefore the method by which one could remove any obstacles to the attainment of enlightenment. And as he presented this view in the text that he wrote, when you spontaneously feel compassion, which has the subjective wish to completely eliminate the suffering of all living beings, just like a mother's wish to remove her dear child's unhappiness, then your compassion is complete and is therefore called great compassion. And I read this to you because here is a philosopher of the highest order who is contributing to the refinement of the ultimate view of selflessness, who in his text is pointing out the importance of compassion. So compassion should never be thought of as some nice little quality that accompanies us. Compassion is fundamental in our pursuit of knowledge, our pursuit of enlightenment. And then he goes on to say, cultivate this compassion towards all beings at all times, whether you are in meditative concentration or in the course of any other activity. So compassion should not be simply relegated to a time when you are sitting meditating. It should accompany your lives. So as I said, all of this compassion is to cultivate the motivation for entering the Mahayana path. In order to then work at cultivating bodhicitta, this Mahayana aspiration, we have to develop equanimity. And equanimity here means that we have an equal attitude towards all others. I mean, if we have compassion and we are working towards helping others, but we have a preference for our friends and family, and we have a sort of neutral feeling towards those people whom we don't really know, and then we have even maybe a delight in the hardships being experienced by those who are enemies or people we really don't like. That is not the basis for being able to develop compassion or develop a true wish to attain a state where we can help all. So in order to create a sort of clear platform for this kind of practice, we have to develop equanimity. And in this particular method of generating bodhicitta, the way in which we do this is to think, I am motivated by a wish to be happy and a wish to remove suffering, free myself of suffering. That's really, if I look at my life, that's a sort of fundamental motivation that guides my life. And however, just as I am motivated by that, you are. This gentleman who is recording us wishes for happiness and the wish to be free of suffering in the same way that I do. And you, and as the meditator, I think that just as I wish for happiness and wish to be free of suffering, you wish for happiness and wish to be free of suffering. And just as I wish to be happy and free of suffering, you do. And it's a process where we have to really think. We have to think about friends. Think this friend who's going through a hard time. All that this friend is motivated by is their wish to find happiness and freedom from suffering. Then we go to the people who are sort of bothersome to us. And we think that person, just as I wish to be happy, that person wishes to be happy. And just as I wish to avoid suffering, that person wishes to avoid suffering. And then we think of the people who really harm us, the people who cause us trouble. And we think, just as that person, just as I wish to be happy, that person is only acting out of this sort of aberrated way in order to find happiness. That's the only thing that is at the core of that person's motivation and a wish to avoid suffering. And then we take it to, you think of the mosquito. The mosquito, just the way I want to be happy and want to avoid suffering, that mosquito wants to be happy and wants to avoid suffering. The flies that bother us. And we should think, we look at a fly and we watch it and we think, we may have whatever feelings we have about flies, but we think, gosh, there's no difference between it and me. I want happiness and don't want to suffer. That fly wants that happiness and doesn't want to suffer. And if we really go through this process, don't think of groups of people, but think of individuals, one individual after another like that. It will change your categorization of people. It will diminish the people whom we care about as opposed to the people we don't care about. If we really view those people we don't care about, those people we feel neutral towards, those people whom we really dislike, recognizing that all that motivates them, all that really motivates their actions is a wish to be happy and to avoid suffering. Suddenly, we've created a certain equanimity in ourselves. We're not going to change them in this meditation. We're simply changing our attitude towards, and this is not, we're not creating a compassionate attitude towards them. We're creating equanimity, which becomes the basis for our engaging in the practices, the actual practices for generating bodhicitta. So, I mentioned that there are two methods for generating this bodhicitta. One is a method where we view every single sentient being as having been our mother in the past. And if we accept the idea of rebirth, and we accept the idea that there is no beginning to existence, we accept the idea that we surely move from planet and solar system to planet and solar system over this infinite past that we have existed in, we have been born to all others, and all others have been born to us. There's not a person we can point at and say, oh, that person hasn't ever been my mother. In some past life, in some world system, in some situation. So that each and this particular method for generating bodhicitta, as I say, presupposes that every single person has been my mother in the past. And that it's not that we have to actually, in our meditation, come to a point of recognizing that, of acknowledging that, of accepting that, of feeling that, and of feeling the enormous kindness that our mother has shown us in this life, and that each and every individual sentient being must have shown us in the past when that person acted as our mother. And we think of our friends, we think of our enemies, we think of those neutral people, and we think of each one as having been our mothers and as having shown us this enormous love that a mother shows to her child, this total willingness to undergo enormous suffering for the sake of their child. That's what each person, each of you has shown towards me. I thank you. And that's the feeling that you are working at cultivating in this particular meditation, to the point where that's that determination to then work towards that state where we can be of benefit to others. That determination is bodhicitta. And that's what this series of thoughts is meant to lead us to. So that's the system of exchange it's called the sevenfold cause and effect method. I'm sorry to give you these technical names for things. It is the method for generating bodhicitta where we have to initially recognize each person as having been our mothers. And I remember accompanying a Lama to America once, and he was asked to teach this. And I was his translator, and we were preparing before the teaching, and he said to me, you Americans, just you watch. When I start talking about the love that a mother has shown for her child, you're going to have people put their hands up and say, my mother wasn't nice to me when I was a child. And sure enough, he started. And someone immediately raised their hand and said, what happens if your mother wasn't very nice to you? He looked at me and he smiled. So like that. If your mother hasn't been particularly nice to you when you were a child, think of someone else who was. And think of all those mothers who have been nice to their children. And think of how normal mothers are like that. Anyway, that's one method. The other method, which I really wanted to sort of dwell on more today, is called exchanging self for others. And in this method, you work at recognizing the kindness that others have shown you, your dependence on others for everything you have, and you develop this appreciation for all that you have received from others. The fact that everything, as I mentioned in developing compassion, everything that we have is dependent on the kindness of others. I mean, I look at the desk before me and, the paper, the book, the fabric. I mean, just to create the cotton that makes this little book cover of mine, demanded someone picking cotton. So many insects killed in the process of growing cotton. So much work that went into taking the cotton to the warehouse, to the mill, to the spinning, to the weaving, etc., to eventually the dyeing, to the stitching into this. All the people who were involved, all the animals that were killed in the process of providing me with this little cover to my book. So every self-cherishing actions, all negative actions stem out of our clinging to a sense of self which we wish to protect, to satisfy, etc. If we really analyze those two things, it will lead us to a determination to diminish our self-cherishing and develop our commitment to others. And out of that comes the determination to really work towards attaining a state, a level where we can truly help others. And that state, that level, is bodhicitta. So again, this second, just as the sevenfold cause and effect method is a series of meditative steps that lead us to this assumption of responsibility towards others, this exchanging self for the suffering of others, and that we breathe out all of our qualities and offer them to others to relieve their suffering. And we try to eventually have this breathing process be part of our normal breathing process, where when we breathe in, we are imagining, we are visualizing that we are removing the suffering of others. And when we breathe out, we are providing others with their with happiness. And we can think of our hearts, which we can think of as the center of our self-cherishing. This is where that sense of self is strongest. And so as we breathe in the suffering of others, we can think of that flame of self-cherishing as being extinguished with all this negativity from others. And we then breathe out the positivity that we possess. As we do this, we are meant to, and we can even imagine that we are actually assuming the suffering of others. We're not able to, but we can imagine it, and that we are actually providing others with happiness. And we can then imagine a world full of happy people whose suffering has been relieved as a result of our abilities. That's the point where we then say to ourselves, but this is all pretend. I can't do this. I must work towards attaining a state where I can do this. And that I must work towards the attainment of a state where I can do this. I am determined to work towards a state where I can do it. That is bodhicitta. That determination, that commitment to working towards the ability to be of benefit to others. That is bodhicitta. The ability to be of benefit to others is the state of full enlightenment, the omniscient state of the Buddha. And that determination to attain that state is bodhicitta. Now, so that's the goal. That's the Mahayana goal. That's what the practitioners in Nalanda would aspire to. That would be the whole purpose of being a member of Nalanda, of entering Nalanda and undergoing the trainings. That's what it was all about. However, it doesn't stop there. Once you have generated this bodhicitta, this determination, this vow to work towards the attainment of enlightenment, you then have to work towards the attainment of enlightenment. So that's when they talk about the amount of time that it takes to attain full enlightenment as being 3 incalculable eons. When does that clock start ticking? It starts ticking at the point that we generate bodhicitta. So we are a far ways from the beginning of 3 incalculable eons. Now, what is an incalculable eon? I remember my teacher saying to me, a calculable eon is if you were to make a pit 500 meters by 500 meters, 500 meters deep, and you were to fill it with the little hairs of when you shave a monk, when you cut the hair on a monk's head, and if you were to fill it with hairs from a monk, and if every 100 years you threw out 1 hair, when the pit is empty, that would be 1 calculable eon. So figure from that what an incalculable eon would be. 3 of those and you become a Buddha. 3 of those once you have generated bodhicitta. Now, bodhicitta, this vow to work towards Buddhahood, you don't, it's not that it's a vow that lasts for your life. It lasts until you become a Buddha. In other words, when you determine that you are going to attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings, not only do you have the responsibility to maintain that commitment throughout your life, you have a commitment to maintain, or you have you have a vow to maintain that commitment over all the lives, 3 incalculable eons of lives, leading to your attainment of Buddhahood. So it's a very important commitment. It has all of these ingredients that I'm telling you about should inform this commitment. They are all the elements that make up the motivation. So then you engage in the practices. And they talk about, you engage in the perfecting of 6 qualities. They're called the 6 perfections. The first of which, and they're in order of ease of accomplishment. The first is generosity, so that the bodhisattva works at perfecting his or her generosity. And you have to develop generosity so that you would be perfectly comfortable giving up your body. Ethics. Your ethics are absolutely pure. Ethics, sort of the moral ways you lead your lives, refraining from non-virtuous actions that harm others, and engaging in virtuous ones where you benefit others. Patience. Patience meaning the not getting angry. Anger is considered to be particularly bad because it wipes away all virtue that you may have accumulated. So whatever good you've done, anger, true, ugly anger, just wipes away the good that you've engaged in. Perseverance, that muscle that keeps you joyously working towards the attainment of virtue. That's the 4th. Concentration. The perfection of concentration is the development of the ability to remain fully concentrated on a certain point for hours. And when concentrated, have a certain delight, have a certain levity, pliance. That would be the attainment of the perfection of concentration. And wisdom, which is the wisdom that realizes the emptiness of self, the emptiness of any inherent existence. Now, all of these qualities, generosity, ethics, patience, perseverance, concentration, and wisdom, in order for them to be perfections, it's not simply patience, but it's a patience that sees the emptiness of the object, of the subject, of the process of engaging in patience towards an object by myself, the subject. So that imbued with these qualities would be an awareness of selflessness. That would be an aspect of the perfection that we are working towards. And so as a result of perfecting these qualities, which is work that we do for 3 incalculable eons, we eventually purify our continuums, purify our minds, purify our motivations, purify our senses of self to the point where we are enlightened and have the true qualifications to be of benefit to others.
Can one achieve full enlightenment? So can you translate what is metta?
Metta is the 4 immeasurables. Okay, it's like the Burmese.
Love.
Yeah, love.
Okay. The difference between love and bodhicitta.
Yeah, within the 4 Brahma viharas.
So love, I'm going to talk about love. When we talk about compassion, as I mentioned, is the wish to remove the suffering of others. Great compassion is the wish to remove the suffering of all sentient beings. Compassion is a wish to remove the suffering others are experiencing. Love is a wish to provide them with happiness. That's love. Bodhicitta, compassion and love are elements that bring about bodhicitta, but they are not bodhicitta. They are, even once you have bodhicitta, they are going to be emotions or attitudes that accompany your practice of bodhicitta once you are a bodhisattva. But bodhicitta, which is, as I say, inspired by love, inspired by compassion, caused by, in the 7-fold cause and effect method for generating bodhicitta, love and compassion are 2 of the causes. Bodhicitta is the determination to attain Buddhahood in order to actually help others. So you can see those as being different. Love is an aspect of bodhicitta, but bodhicitta has these other qualities. Well, let's put it another way. You cannot attain ultimate enlightenment without bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is the needed motivation for attaining full enlightenment. When you have bodhicitta, if your bodhicitta is actually there, you have actually attained bodhicitta, you are a bodhisattva. Once you have attained that state, then you will not be able to seek freedom from suffering for yourself. Your compassion, your devotion to others, your feeling of responsibility for others will inhibit your that sort of more self-centered determination to seek liberation from your suffering. Now, I sit here spewing out these answers that are just the party line. I want you to understand that, I don't have any of these qualities. I'm giving you the stages that we are taught. And another thing I should say, and I sort of alluded to this earlier today, these are the inner practices of monks in Nalanda. These are not philosophical views. These are the motivations that, these are, the deep spiritual motivating ideas that the monks would be working at cultivating, that Buddhists today would be involved in cultivating. But these are inner things, and it's a little funny, I'll be honest, talking about these things with people who are not necessarily practicing Buddhists. These are things that normally, when discussed, are shared by a teacher for his students to practice, to engage in. I'm in the context of what a Nalanda practitioner would actually engage in his meditative practice. I'm telling you, but these are inner things. And since some of you did actually express an interest in and a wish to hear about and maybe even work at cultivating certain meditations, I'm sharing them with you. And the one that I would really, that I hope that you'll take with you, is the one where I talked about how to develop equanimity, where we think, just as I wish for happiness and don't wish to suffer, so does, and you think, really, when you see the spider on the wall, you think, you can look at it, you can say, that spider wishes for happiness and wishes not to suffer as much as I do. There's no difference between his wish for happiness and a wish not to suffer and my wish for happiness and not to suffer. That changes our whole relationship to other living beings. Yes.
Now, when we talk about compassion, yes, I understand what compassion is, and to a little degree, I think I follow it. But how do we bring about equanimity when people try to hurt you, harm you, and they slander you? How to deal with that?
For a real practitioner, they would think, I remember one Lama saying, when I sit to meditate, I can't think of any enemies. I don't have any enemies. I don't have anyone who's trying to harm me. He's a rather realized being, and he probably doesn't have any enemies. But having people who do try to harm us should be considered by the true practitioner to be a good opportunity for us to work on this stuff. In other words, if I didn't have any enemies and I was just sitting there trying to develop compassion and I was able to think of only friends and like that, it would all be sort of fun. But when our meditation, when this process is being provoked by those who provoke us, then we're working on real stuff. Then this analytical process of thinking, that person who's harming us, harming me, that person may have an aberrated, unjustified, really ugly motivation. But the person is simply acting out of his own sort of limited understanding of how to attain happiness for himself. And out of that should come a sense of compassion from us. We should think, poor thing, that person has such a distorted view, and it all comes from his distorted mind. And as a result of what he's doing, he's going to suffer. I mean, if we believe in the laws of karma, those kinds of actions by others, unjust actions, they're going to pay for them in the future. And if we can really feel for them and for the suffering that they're going to experience, then we can develop compassion towards them. Now, these are not simple things, as I said. That's why it's sort of uncomfortable to be saying it to. I have no idea to what extent anyone here is invested in a spiritual process, and therefore to come along and say, this is what you have to do. This is sort of deep inner work, and these are the ways in which we have to work at, making lemonade out of the lemons in our lives. To use a really quaint, I apologize for that, but.
Difficult.
Yes.
And it's not as if we flick a switch and we get there. This is work that we have to do over time and years. We will find, that our attitudes towards those who harm us fluctuate, but we have to keep on working on it. And we don't necessarily change the other people. We're not here. Spiritual practice is not about changing anyone else. The only person we're working at changing is ourselves. We are working towards assuming responsibility for others, trying to help others, but we're not going to change them. The spiritual work is changing ourselves.
Two things I want to focus on. One is
seeing
the end of good times is terrifying.
Seeing or imagining the end of good times. Indeed, I think this is what most of us go through, especially those of us who lead comfortable lives. We are scared like. And then you said, when the thought comes, laugh it off. So I guess I'm going to follow that. And second one is, if someone has not been nice to you, you mentioned mother, I'll say if someone has not been nice to you, think of someone else who has been nice. This is really wonderful. Because for every person who has not been nice, there are hundreds who have been good to us. Thank you.
And not only have there been hundreds who have been good to us, but there are so many who have been helpful inadvertently, who have contributed to our happiness without even realizing it.
Less or more protected lives than people who are living outside the monastery. So do you think the techniques that you adopt to obtain spiritual enlightenment can work in our conditions where the pressures and the difficulties and challenges are so much more? We don't have an environment around us which can support this kind of. What do you think?
Well, I have no idea of most people's socioeconomic background, but I do have an idea of the socioeconomic backgrounds of my fellow monks. And the elder bunch of monks came from Tibet in 1959, really struggled for many, many years here in India in exile. They were all put in an old abandoned prison in West Bengal where they maintained the traditions, the Nalanda tradition. For 9, 10 years they all lived in a place where 25% of them died of tuberculosis because it was really unhealthy. But they struggled, and I'll give you some sort of amusing aspects of it. The only decent hospital where you could get any kind of treatment for tuberculosis was an American missionary hospital. And the word within the monastery, this prison where all the monks were housed, this is all the monks coming together. The word there was, if you get sick and are sent to that hospital and they try to convert you, say that you're a Christian, because you'll get much better treatment. And they'll throw in a Bible. And a Bible is really nice because you can take the inside out and it has a really nice strong cover that you can then put your Buddhist prayers in. So that was, so they made light of all these things, even when they were, in really doing not well in the hospital. Then they came down to Karnataka, where the Indian government provided them with lands. And for about 2 years, they lived in tents. And they flattened the land. The first job they had was this was teak forest. The teak trees were all cut down and taken. They had to uproot the roots, and they had to start tilling the land that was going to support them. And they would have 3 monks pulling the plow and 1 monk holding the plow. And for years they put aside their studies, they put aside everything but the most sort of important pujas and practices that they did, and they devoted themselves to creating a place that would support them. Since the mid-'80s, when China sort of tolerated monks coming to India, which stopped about 10 years ago, there were monks who would cross over the mountains. And they would cross over the mountains with, sneakers, running shoes, and they would arrive with frostbite, and they would arrive with all sorts of things. And they would walk over the mountain for a month to avoid the Chinese border patrols and things like that. And so these people have experienced real suffering. They came down to Karnataka and they entered the monasteries, and life was tough. I mean, when I joined in '85, the food was of such poor quality that I saw that in the young monks, if they cut themselves, it wouldn't heal because they had no nutrition, no vitamins that would... so I don't think one can, point to the monks and say, oh, they have it easy. They don't experience the challenges that we do. Life as a refugee within a monastic community is tough. And I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm saying that that's the reality that they live, and it's no better or worse. It's real, and all situations within cyclic existence have suffering as part of it all.
This is not arguable. At a personal level, using these insights others, the world, and that a lot of the suffering that I experience is caused by me. Because actually it gives one this choices and do things differently. So I think there is something. It might be a bit brutal, but it is freeing in a way. But then when one is again like taking that further and looking at situations of say social justice, children, things like that, and then we're bringing in the doctrine of karma, which is causality is fine, but to say that one is responsible. So I'm just saying, how does one engage with these ideas in a more nuanced or sensitive way? Or because it does get used sometimes to justify horrible things that happen to people or social groups. Or I'm just struggling with both sides of that.
So, talking from the point of view of, and to someone who is viewing it from a spiritual point of view, I think it's really important to view these processes as being spiritual processes that I am dealing with, undergoing, working my way through. That it is my karma that I'm judging. It is my assumption of responsibility for the fact that I'm having challenges today due to my past actions that were non-virtuous. This is a self process, an inner process, to judge someone else, to say that that person is suffering due to the fact that he or she engaged in non-virtuous actions is not part of it. That's wrong. And we have to be very clear that we're working on ourselves. I think that sort of that's vital. There's a nice Muslim Sufi saying, the unwise man tries to change others. The medium-wise man tries to change his environment. Wise man tries to change himself. Well, I feel that we have to be wise people. Well, I want to thank you all. It's been lovely to come to Goa, and it's been wonderful to think about these things and go through this process with everyone. Thank you very much.
This is for you. Maria Koshi. Unal Sarekar. Kalsi Hasbu. That's yes, he's a photographer. Kalsi Hasbu. Joy, not Roy. Nice to have a surname of Joy. Nishita Holo Yulaka. Nishita. That's it. Aditi Deo. Aditi Deo. Sagar Jadhav. Vanessa Dias. John Shah. Oh, today he's not there. John is always there for all the functions. Bindu. Bindu. Bojana Rajkov. She is from Philol, okay. Yeah. So she can collect from you. Upma Gampar. Ranjani Swami. Replay your photo. Suman Khanolkar. Leela Khanolkar. That is Suman. Anjali D'Souza. Aparna NP. Sriya Sanjay Kadar. Lokabhati. Meera Narayan Kuti. Sonal Lahiri.
Thank you for your kindness.
So the others have been absent? Or no? From here, so we have taken this tomorrow. They can test. So about in 5. So can that? Dr. Akash Sargapur is here. Maria Narada.